I wanted to share my experience with life coaching and how transformative it was for me instead of therapy. So I was in therapy for 2.5 years, and I went into therapy thinking that it was going to be easy, that the therapist was going to give me 3 steps to overcome my identity crisis from leaving my teaching career. And it was really the farthest thing from that. So I was labeled codependent, anxious. I was told I was suffering from childhood emotional neglect. And I was all of those things for sure. But I wasn't really given any tools or strategies that were really helpful when I was trying to cope with the labels that had been thrown at me left and right. And so I was given the suggestion of carrying invisible scissors in my pocket to cut the strings of codependency when they were attaching, or carrying invisible cooking spray with myself so that way I could spray it before I went into any situations where I might be codependent. And that might be fine and all for someone who's super aware of their codependency, but I had no awareness. I didn't know when I was being codependent. I didn't know when it was going to happen. I knew it was often with family, but I really couldn't manage it. And so I just went into this obsessive nature of just like reading self-help book after self-help book after self-help book. And after 2.5 years of therapy, I really didn't feel like I was making any progress at all. I was being gaslighted to take anti-anxiety meds and then antidepressants because I was told that that would be the way that I would have the stairs to crawl out of the ditch instead of clawing my way out of the ditch every single day. And I just couldn't allow myself to take the medication because I felt like a failure already, because I left my teaching career after 6 years, because I wasn't loving being a stay-at-home mom. And I just felt like if I had to take a pill to get through the day, then I really was a failure. And what hope was there for me? And so I started therapy with the hope of feeling like I could handle life and figure out who I was, so I wouldn't feel so dark and depressed about leaving my career and having a hard time adjusting to being a stay-at-home mom. But it was really nothing like I expected it to be. And after 2.5 years, I felt worse than when I started therapy. I felt like I was in a darker place. I felt like my marriage was failing because I was miserable. My husband was stressed from his job. I expected him to save me when he came home. He didn't know how to do that, and I couldn't even tell him what I needed to make it easier on him. And I was short-tempered with my kids. I just felt like I was like this ticking time bomb ready to snap at any moment. And I didn't like myself. I didn't want my girls to be anything like me. And I just felt like when I started therapy, it might be better if I ended my life or if I ran away, so that I wasn't subjecting my kids to this miserable mom. And that feeling didn't change by the time I left therapy. In fact, that feeling was there even more than it was before therapy. And so on my last session with my therapist, she of course brought up medications, and I didn't want to take them. And then she shamed me for the session going over as if it were my fault. And then as I was preparing to leave her office, she was like, well, time to put your game face back on, huh? And that really wasn't nice. And that felt awful. And I was, went to this person hoping they would help me. But at the end of the day, I felt like they were hurting me more than anything. And I mean, I get it. All I did was sob and bawl my eyes out the entire time I was in her office. So I wouldn't want to be around me either. But then again, that's what she's there for. And she also kept asking me if I was anorexic, because that was the type of patient she focused on more so than someone with childhood trauma, although I wasn't anorexic. And so she often questioned me about that and didn't take my word for it, and tried to convince me that I was in fact anorexic. So it was just all the way around not a great situation. And so I left therapy not knowing what to do or where to turn. And I met a life coach through a networking group. And I reached out to her to get more information about working with a life coach. And I'm so glad that I did, because that really was so transformational for me. In 3 months, 8 sessions, I made more growth, more progress than I had in 2.5 years of therapy. And that I just didn't even know was possible. And so here's what my coaching journey was like. So 8 sessions, and I didn't get stuck in the stories like I did in therapy. It wasn't about that time when, it wasn't about the feelings of that situation. It was about the meanings that I was making about myself and those situations. And so we didn't stay stuck in stories. And that was really important because in therapy, it was like, I just told the same story every single session. Same one, every session, 2.5 years. It changed slightly, but generally it was basically the same. I was struggling being at home with my kids. I was struggling because my husband wasn't helping me when he would get home from work with managing my emotions and, being with the kids the way that I wanted him to, and helping with the house the way that I wanted him to. And that was generally it. And so really what we did in the coaching in the 8 sessions was we got to the root cause of why I was being codependent, why I was being anxious, and why I was letting the childhood emotional neglect affect me the way that it was. So we looked for the patterns, we looked at the meanings I made, and that's where the mindset work came in, because I worked on shifting those patterns because I learned what the triggers were. I learned how to not go into the spiral as often because I was prepared for how to work through the triggers when I was triggered by them. And so I was able to learn how to respond rather than react, where when I was in therapy, I was just constantly in reaction mode. Anything that came my way, I would just react, and I would snap, and I would lose my shit, and then I would feel guilty about it. And that was just over and over and over and over and over. And that all came to a stop when I was in coaching, because I realized that I was living with a lot of outdated beliefs. I was trying to use strategies that really weren't aligned with where I was in my journey. And so everything I tried really felt like a struggle, and it felt awkward, and it felt uncomfortable, and I didn't want to do it. And so I would just stop, and then I would end up back in the same place that I was. And it was just this constant vicious cycle. But I learned how to use the tools that I was given by my life coach. And it wasn't about invisible cooking spray. It wasn't about invisible scissors. There was no need for me to take medication because everything that I was doing in life was a learned behavior. So I was basically unlearning all of the things that were not helpful for me and learning things that were, so that way I could actually be present in the moment and enjoy what I was doing with my kids, my husband, myself. And I realized that I didn't need other people to tell me how to feel, how to think, how to believe. I didn't need my husband to rescue me at the end of the day. I learned how to do that for myself. And that was just in 8 sessions. It was really an amazing experience and journey, one that I wish I had done before therapy. And I should have known going into the therapy that it probably wasn't going to be helpful, because the other therapy experiences I had as a kid and a teenager also were not helpful. They also left me feeling like I was broken or there was something wrong with me. But I learned in coaching that I'm not broken. I was just out of alignment. And so that was such a huge gift for me. And I was able to break a lot of the cycles. So I no longer felt like I didn't want my kids to be like me. And I felt like I actually was in control. And so that's why I'm so thankful for the opportunity of been through life coaching, because I came out so much stronger on the other side instead of feeling hopeless, weak, and defeated.